Paul Vario was born in 1914 in Brooklyn, New York, in the neighborhood of Canarsie, an area that would later be infamous for its connection to organized crime. His early life was marked by poverty, exposure to street crime, and a community where survival often meant bending the rules. The streets of Brooklyn in the 1920s and 1930s were a crucible for young men like Vario, who grew up watching a mixture of family loyalty, neighborhood pride, and the allure of power through illicit means. From a young age, he learned that influence, respect, and reputation were not handed out, they were earned, often through acts that skirted the edges of the law. Vario's early experiences with petty theft and local street gangs offered him a practical education in discipline, loyalty, and tactical thinking. Unlike many of his peers, he had a methodical mind and an uncanny ability to understand people's motivations, a skill that would later make him invaluable in the criminal underworld. By the time he was a teenager, Paul had already begun to carve out a reputation as someone who could be both feared and respected. Family ties were central to Vario's early life. Growing up in a tight-knit Italian-American household, he observed the importance of loyalty and family connections. These principles were mirrored in the operations of the Mafia, where trust and loyalty often outweighed sheer brute force. He saw firsthand how influence in the neighborhood could be leveraged not just for personal gain, but to protect family and allies. During the Great Depression, opportunities were scarce, and crime became a tempting avenue for young men like Vario. He began associating with small-time criminals, gradually learning the ropes of organized operations, how to manage money, maintain secrecy, and navigate the ever-present risk of law enforcement. What set Vario apart was his intelligence and patience. He understood that real power in the underworld was rarely loud, it was quiet, calculated, and deliberate. Unlike brash young criminals who sought immediate gratification, Vario planned his moves carefully, always thinking several steps ahead. By the 1940s, Paul Vario was already involved with the Lucchese crime family, a major player in New York's organized crime network. His role was not defined by flashy crimes or high-profile heists, but by his ability to manage crews, enforce discipline, and execute complex operations without drawing unnecessary attention. His quiet demeanor masked a sharp mind and a talent for organization. Vario understood that influence in the Mafia was not just about committing crimes, it was about creating systems that generated consistent power and wealth while minimizing risk. Vario's neighborhood of Canarsie was fertile ground for his operations. He had a network of loyal associates, many of whom had grown up with him, sharing the same streets, struggles, and sense of loyalty. These relationships allowed him to establish control over local operations, from loan sharking and gambling to labor rackets. Unlike many crime figures who attracted attention through violence or extravagance, Vario's methods were subtle. He relied on strategic partnerships, intimidation only when necessary, and careful manipulation of the social and economic networks around him. Education in Vario's world was experiential. He learned from observing others, from failures, and from strategic thinking in the moment. Every small operation, every negotiation, and every interaction with law enforcement or rival crews added to his knowledge base. His ability to predict human behavior and anticipate challenges made him a formidable figure in the Mafia hierarchy. By the late 1950s, Paul Vario had earned a reputation not only as a shrewd operator, but as a man whose word carried weight. His calm presence inspired loyalty, while his reputation for enforcing discipline ensured compliance without constant violence. The quiet power that Vario wielded in the 1960s was built on decades of observation, patience, and strategic action. He understood that in the Mafia, lasting influence was not built on flashy stunts or media attention, it was built on respect, fear, and the ability to make others feel that aligning with him was the smartest decision they could make. Vario's early life and rise were a blueprint for how a combination of intelligence, patience, and streetwise cunning could translate into real power in the underworld. By the end of this period, Paul Vario had transitioned from a street-smart youth to a key figure in the Lucchese crime family. His operations had expanded, his crew was loyal, and his influence was growing quietly but steadily. What remained consistent throughout his rise was his strategic approach. Every move measured, every relationship calculated, and every opportunity exploited without unnecessary risk. The lesson from Vario's early years is clear. Influence and power are often cultivated in silence, through observation, learning, and calculated action, rather than through rash or violent displays. The 1960s were a turning point for Paul Vario, marking a period where his quiet influence transformed into a formidable power structure within the Lucchese crime family. By this time, Vario was no longer just a streetwise operator. He had become a strategist, a manager, and a tactician whose decisions shaped the operations of an entire criminal network. The streets of Brooklyn, once just a playground of youthful survival, had become the stage for complex financial and social maneuvering. Vario's understanding of human behavior allowed him to manipulate relationships and control outcomes without drawing unnecessary attention from law enforcement or rival factions. Vario's operations during this era were multifaceted. He oversaw gambling rings, loan sharking, and extortion networks, carefully distributing responsibilities to trusted lieutenants and crews. Unlike impulsive criminals who relied on force alone, Vario emphasized efficiency, secrecy, and organization. Every aspect of his operation was calculated to maximize revenue while minimizing risk. This was an era when organized crime was becoming increasingly sophisticated, and Vario was at the forefront of this transformation. He understood that controlling people, money, and territory required more than brute strength. It demanded strategy, foresight, and a deep comprehension of social dynamics. A key element of Vario's approach was his ability to maintain loyalty through respect and incentive. He rewarded dedication, punished betrayal quietly but effectively, and built an ecosystem where associates felt secure under his leadership. Vario's quiet, almost imperceptible authority made him a figure both feared and admired. Men under his guidance were willing to execute complex operations with precision, knowing that their success reflected not only on them but on the entire organization. He created a culture of disciplined ambition, where personal gain was intertwined with loyalty to the network he managed. During this period, Vario also recognized the importance of diversifying operations. Gambling alone was profitable, but it carried risks of police raids and violent disputes. Loan sharking offered steady income but required careful management to avoid drawing attention. Extortion and control over local unions provided both leverage and legitimacy. By spreading his interests across multiple revenue streams, Vario minimized risk while consolidating influence. His operations were not random, they were systems designed to create sustainable power. Each venture was a node in a network, feeding into a larger framework of control, trust, and financial gain. The human element was central to Vario's empire. He recruited associates not solely based on skill or loyalty, but on their ability to understand and navigate the social ecosystem. Men who could negotiate, persuade, or intimidate without creating chaos were invaluable. Vario himself excelled at reading people, anticipating reactions, and identifying weaknesses. This psychological insight allowed him to maintain dominance without resorting to constant violence. He understood that respect, subtle intimidation, and the perception of omnipresent influence could achieve more than a direct confrontation. By the mid-1960s, Vario's influence extended beyond street-level operations. He became a central figure in strategic planning for the Lucchese family, consulting on major decisions regarding territory, alliances, and resource allocation. His quiet authority allowed him to advise without overtly challenging high-ranking members, making him a trusted and indispensable advisor. This period demonstrated Vario's ability to balance ambition with discretion, a skill that distinguished him from many contemporaries who relied solely on fear or aggression. The social dynamics of the time played a significant role in Vario's methods. Brooklyn and surrounding neighborhoods were tightly knit, ethnically homogeneous communities where personal relationships mattered as much as financial leverage. Vario exploited this network, establishing himself as a figure capable of resolving disputes, facilitating agreements, and controlling outcomes. He understood that his power did not exist in isolation. It depended on the intricate web of alliances, obligations, and expectations that defined the social fabric. His reputation as a mediator and enforcer alike allowed him to manipulate situations to his advantage without overt displays of force. A notable feature of Vario's approach was his risk management strategy. He often relied on intermediaries and layers of associates to shield himself from direct exposure. By delegating tasks, supervising operations from a distance, and maintaining plausible deniability, he minimized the chances of legal entanglement. This method required trust, vigilance, and meticulous planning. Vario's ability to balance ambition with caution was a hallmark of his success. He avoided unnecessary confrontation with law enforcement while steadily expanding his control over lucrative operations. Vario's power also rested on strategic alliances with other influential figures within the Mafia. These alliances were carefully curated, often based on mutual benefit, family ties, or shared interests. He understood that collaboration could achieve far more than solitary effort, and that maintaining relationships with peers, rivals, and subordinates was critical to long-term dominance. His dealings were marked by a mix of diplomacy, subtle intimidation, and strategic generosity. Men who worked with Vario found themselves both protected and subtly indebted, ensuring loyalty without overt coercion. Despite his quiet demeanor, Vario was not immune to conflict. Rivalries and disputes occasionally erupted, and his ability to navigate these crises without disrupting his overall operations was a testament to his leadership. He combined psychological insight, situational awareness, and strategic negotiation to diffuse potential threats. Violence was always a last resort, employed only when necessary to preserve authority or eliminate persistent opposition. His calm, measured approach reinforced his image as a calculated and reliable figure within the organization. The 1960s also saw Vario expanding his network of legitimate connections. Business owners, union leaders, and political figures often intersected with his operations. Vario leveraged these relationships to shield his interests, gain information, and exert subtle influence over legal and civic structures. This integration of legitimate and illicit spheres exemplified his understanding of power. Real authority is reinforced by control over both visible and invisible mechanisms within a community. By the end of the decade, Vario had become a master of orchestration, managing complex operations that spanned neighborhoods, industries, and social strata. Through all this, the central theme of Vario's strategy was calculated patience. He avoided rash actions, understood the consequences of each decision, and carefully timed moves to maximize impact. His empire was not built overnight. It was the result of decades of observation, learning, and methodical action. This approach allowed him to weather challenges that would have toppled less disciplined figures. His story demonstrates that influence, power, and authority are cultivated steadily, nurtured through intelligence, insight, and disciplined execution. The lesson from Paul Vario's rise during the 1960s is clear. Lasting influence and leadership are grounded in observation, preparation, and the careful management of people and resources. Aggression alone cannot sustain power. True authority is quiet, deliberate, and reinforced by strategic action. Vario's story offers a blueprint for understanding not only the dynamics of organized crime, but also the broader principles of leadership, strategy, and human behavior. His life illustrates that while power may attract attention, it is the invisible, calculated networks behind the scenes that truly sustain it. As the 1960s drew to a close, Paul Vario's influence had grown to a level few within the Lucchese crime family could rival. His reputation for intelligence, discretion, and strategic thinking allowed him to consolidate power across Brooklyn and parts of Queens, transforming his network from a series of loosely connected operations into a cohesive, disciplined empire. Vario's approach to leadership was marked not by ostentation but by the careful orchestration of people, money, and territory. Every decision he made reflected a deep understanding of human nature, the mechanics of organized crime, and the necessity of operating in the shadows. Vario's consolidation strategy relied heavily on control over personnel and relationships. He meticulously identified capable individuals, offering them roles that leveraged their strengths while reinforcing loyalty to his overarching vision. Associates were not simply hired for their ability to commit crimes. They were selected for their understanding of organization, discretion, and the subtle art of influence. Men under Vario's command learned that efficiency, secrecy, and reliability were rewarded, while carelessness or disloyalty could have long-term consequences. Through careful selection and disciplined management, Vario ensured that his network operated like a well-oiled machine, capable of executing complex operations without attracting undue attention. During this period, Vario's primary operations continued to focus on gambling, loan sharking, and labor rackets, but they had expanded in scale and sophistication. Gambling dens flourished under his management, generating significant revenue while remaining discreet enough to avoid frequent law enforcement intervention. Loan sharking provided a steady income stream, with carefully structured arrangements that ensured repayment and reinforced loyalty. Labor rackets offered not only financial gain but also influence over local businesses and unions, granting Vario leverage in both legitimate and illicit spheres. By diversifying his interests, Vario minimized risk while increasing his control over the local economy and the lives of those within it. A critical element of Vario's success was his ability to manage conflicts and prevent internal disruption. Organized crime, by its nature, was rife with tension, rivalries, and potential betrayal. Vario's calm, calculating approach allowed him to anticipate disputes before they escalated, often using subtle negotiation, persuasion, or intimidation to maintain order. He understood that violence was a tool, not a default solution, and that the perception of omnipresent authority could often achieve compliance more effectively than direct confrontation. His ability to maintain a balance between respect and fear created a stable environment in which his operations could thrive. Vario's power extended beyond his immediate crew. He cultivated relationships with other influential figures within the Lucchese family and allied organizations, using diplomacy, strategic alliances, and shared interests to strengthen his position. These connections provided both protection and opportunity, allowing Vario to participate in high-level decisions while maintaining operational autonomy. His understanding of interfamily politics, the ambitions of his peers, and the vulnerabilities of rivals allowed him to navigate a complex network of alliances without unnecessary exposure. The late 1960s also marked a period of expansion into more sophisticated criminal enterprises. Vario began overseeing operations that required logistical coordination, financial management, and strategic foresight. This included the coordination of multiple crews across different neighborhoods, ensuring that each operation fed into the larger structure without overlapping or creating unnecessary risk. Vario's meticulous planning extended to accounting, distribution, and the monitoring of associates, reflecting a level of managerial sophistication rarely seen in street-level crime. Each operation was a small piece of a larger puzzle, designed to consolidate revenue, influence, and control. Psychology played a central role in Vario's consolidation of power. He was adept at reading people, understanding motivations, and identifying potential threats before they materialized. This skill allowed him to maintain loyalty, enforce discipline, and create an environment in which associates felt both protected and compelled to perform. Vario's quiet authority was reinforced by his ability to make subtle but decisive interventions, signaling to both allies and rivals that he was aware, in control, and prepared to act if necessary. His reputation as a strategist and enforcer alike solidified his standing, ensuring that his network operated efficiently and without internal collapse. Vario's approach to expansion also included integration with legitimate businesses, creating layers of protection and providing avenues for laundering income. He understood that power could be reinforced through visibility, influence, and control over legal entities. Business owners, union leaders, and political figures became part of his extended network, often unwittingly contributing to his influence through routine interactions. This blend of legitimate and illicit activity exemplified Vario's understanding of power. It was not enough to dominate through fear or intimidation. Lasting influence required presence, perception, and control across multiple spheres. By the early 1970s, Vario had achieved a level of dominance that made him indispensable within the Lucchese family's hierarchy. He had created an operational structure capable of executing complex projects with minimal oversight, ensuring that his crew remained efficient and disciplined. His strategic patience, attention to detail, and understanding of human nature allowed him to maintain this dominance without drawing excessive law enforcement attention. Vario's methods demonstrated that influence and authority in organized crime were not built on flashiness or brute force, but on careful planning, strategic alliances, and disciplined execution. Throughout this period, Vario also emphasized mentorship and the cultivation of future leaders. He trained younger associates in the subtleties of leadership, negotiation, and strategic thinking. These lessons went beyond criminal activity, focusing on understanding people, managing risk, and executing operations efficiently. By empowering his crew with knowledge and guidance, Vario created a legacy of competence and loyalty that reinforced his authority and ensured the sustainability of his empire. This approach transformed his network from a loose collection of individuals into a cohesive, disciplined, and resilient organization. The culmination of Vario's efforts during the late 1960s and early 1970s demonstrates the power of strategic planning, disciplined execution, and human insight. He built an empire not through reckless action or brute force, but through observation, foresight, and the meticulous management of people and resources. His success illustrates that influence is sustained not by immediate gratification or flashy displays, but by consistent, intelligent action over time. Vario's story serves as a lesson in the value of patience, strategy, and the careful cultivation of relationships. By the 1970s, Paul Vario had reached the apex of his influence within the Lucchese crime family. His empire was no longer confined to the neighborhoods of Brooklyn. It had expanded across multiple boroughs, integrating both illicit and legitimate networks that reinforced his authority. Vario's approach during this era demonstrated a rare combination of strategic patience, operational discipline, and psychological acumen. Every action, from managing crews to negotiating alliances, was calculated to strengthen his position while minimizing exposure to law enforcement scrutiny. Vario's operations in the 1970s reflected both scale and sophistication. Gambling remained a cornerstone of his empire, but it had evolved into a multi-layered system with overlapping networks that were difficult for outsiders to penetrate. Underground poker games, betting parlors, and private card rooms flourished under his management. Each location was monitored closely, with trusted associates overseeing operations and ensuring accountability. Vario's talent for delegation allowed him to manage these complex operations while remaining largely removed from day-to-day activities, providing a layer of insulation from potential law enforcement action. Loan sharking was another pillar of Vario's empire, but it had matured into a highly structured enterprise. Debtors were carefully monitored, and payments were enforced through a combination of incentives and subtle intimidation. Vario understood that maintaining perceived authority was as important as actual enforcement. Borrowers complied not solely out of fear of punishment, but because they recognized the precision, reach, and influence behind the operation. The structure of his loan system allowed for steady revenue generation and reinforced loyalty among those who worked for him. A key feature of Vario's dominance in this period was his control over labor rackets and union influence. By leveraging relationships with local union officials, he secured both financial gain and a strategic advantage over competitors. Control over labor contracts, trucking routes, and warehouse operations allowed Vario to create a system where legitimate business activity was closely intertwined with his broader network. This integration of legitimate and illicit operations exemplified his understanding of systematic power. Influence is most effective when it permeates multiple layers of social, economic, and organizational structures. Vario's rise to this level of influence was also marked by his ability to anticipate threats and navigate complex interpersonal dynamics. He recognized that power was fragile and could be undermined by both internal dissent and external scrutiny. Associates were carefully selected, trained, and monitored to ensure compliance and competence. Rival factions were approached with diplomacy, strategic alliance, or subtle intimidation, depending on the situation. Vario understood that the most effective form of control was psychological, creating a reputation that preceded action and often ensured cooperation without the need for overt violence. During the 1970s, Vario became known not only for his operational acumen, but also for his strategic discretion. Unlike other figures who relied on flamboyance or public displays of power, he maintained a low profile while exercising significant influence behind the scenes. This approach allowed him to operate effectively even as law enforcement agencies began to intensify their focus on organized crime. Vario's ability to remain in the shadows, combined with his meticulous management of associates, ensured the continued growth and stability of his network despite increasing external pressure. One of the hallmarks of Vario's leadership was his capacity for organizational foresight. He understood that the long-term survival of his empire required careful planning, succession management, and risk mitigation. Associates were groomed not only to execute operations but to understand the strategic principles underlying the enterprise. By creating layers of leadership and distributing responsibilities strategically, Vario ensured that the network could continue functioning even in the absence of direct supervision. This organizational resilience was a key factor in the sustainability of his empire. Vario's influence also extended into political and social spheres. While he avoided overt public attention, he maintained connections with individuals in positions of authority who could provide information, protection, or leverage. These relationships were subtle and reciprocal, reflecting Vario's understanding of influence beyond the immediate criminal context. By integrating elements of legal, civic, and business networks into his operations, he created a multifaceted system of control that amplified his reach and reinforced the perception of omnipresent power. The 1970s also brought increasing law enforcement pressure, as federal agencies and local police began to implement more sophisticated surveillance and investigation techniques. Vario responded with the same combination of patience, planning, and discretion that had defined his entire career. Operations were compartmentalized, information flow was controlled, and intermediaries were used to shield him from direct exposure. Associates were trained to understand the importance of operational security, ensuring that the network could continue functioning even under scrutiny. Vario's calm, calculated response to legal pressure demonstrated that intelligence, preparation, and strategic delegation were often more effective than aggression in preserving power. Psychology remained central to Vario's command. He understood that influence depended not only on actions but on perceptions. Associates, rivals, and even law enforcement had to perceive that Vario's reach was comprehensive and that his judgment was precise. This perception of omniscience created a climate in which cooperation was often voluntary, disputes were minimized, and resistance was rare. Vario's mastery of social dynamics reinforced his authority and ensured that operations continued with minimal disruption. Despite the increasing scale of his operations, Vario maintained a focus on discipline, loyalty, and efficiency. He recognized that a successful organization depended on motivated, competent personnel who understood their roles and responsibilities. Training, mentorship, and careful supervision ensured that each associate could perform effectively while remaining aligned with the broader goals of the network. By investing in human capital and cultivating loyalty through respect and fairness, Vario reinforced both operational efficiency and organizational stability. The peak of Vario's influence was characterized by strategic control rather than ostentatious displays of power. His empire was a sophisticated web of operations, relationships, and influence that spanned neighborhoods, industries, and social networks. Vario's success demonstrates that enduring authority is not built on immediate gratification or violent spectacle, but on careful planning, disciplined execution, and a profound understanding of human behavior. His life offers lessons not only about the mechanics of organized crime, but about leadership, strategy, and the cultivation of influence in any context. As the 1970s progressed, Paul Vario faced an increasingly complex environment that tested his strategic skills, patience, and leadership. His criminal empire, now extensive and highly organized, attracted the attention of federal agencies, local law enforcement, and rival factions within organized crime. Vario's rise to prominence had not gone unnoticed, and while his reputation for quiet authority and meticulous planning had allowed him to operate largely unimpeded for years, the growing scrutiny of the era demanded heightened vigilance. Navigating this pressure became a defining challenge of his career. Law enforcement tactics were evolving. The Federal Bureau of Investigation, the FBI, and other agencies began employing more sophisticated surveillance methods, including wiretaps, undercover operations, and informants. Vario recognized that exposure could dismantle years of careful planning and investment. His response was methodical and deliberate. He compartmentalized his operations, ensured that direct involvement in illegal activities was minimal, and relied on trusted associates to manage day-to-day functions. By creating layers of responsibility, he insulated himself from direct culpability while maintaining control over the broader network. This period also highlighted the importance of operational security and discretion. Vario insisted that his crews adhere to strict protocols when conducting business. Communication was carefully monitored, meetings were discreet, and sensitive information was shared only on a need-to-know basis. He understood that even minor lapses could attract attention or compromise operations. By instilling a culture of vigilance and responsibility, Vario minimized risk while preserving the integrity of his empire. Associates were trained not only in operational procedures, but in the subtle art of discretion, learning that silence and careful observation were as crucial as courage and skill. Internal challenges were another aspect of Vario's environment. Ambition, jealousy, and differing agendas among associates created potential for conflict. Vario's leadership relied heavily on his ability to navigate human psychology, identifying potential sources of discord before they escalated. He maintained discipline through a combination of respect, subtle intimidation, and strategic delegation. Associates understood that loyalty was not merely expected, it was rewarded, while betrayal or incompetence could have lasting consequences. Vario's calm authority ensured that internal tensions were managed efficiently, preventing disruption to operations and reinforcing the perception of an unassailable hierarchy. Rival factions within the broader Lucchese family and allied organizations also posed challenges. Competing interests often led to disputes over territory, revenue streams, and influence. Vario approached these rivalries with a mix of diplomacy, negotiation, and calculated pressure. He understood that overt confrontation could invite law enforcement attention or destabilize alliances, so he often relied on psychological leverage and strategic alliances to achieve his objectives. By maintaining a reputation for intelligence, foresight, and decisiveness, he ensured that conflicts were resolved in ways that strengthened his authority rather than undermining it. A defining feature of this period was Varios' ability to balance ambition with caution. While the expansion of his empire was a natural goal, he recognized that overreach could be catastrophic. He carefully evaluated opportunities, considering not only potential gains but also the risks involved. This strategic caution allowed him to pursue high-reward operations without exposing himself or his network to unnecessary danger. By calculating each move and anticipating responses from law enforcement, rivals, and associates, Vario maintained a level of control that few in his position could achieve. The pressure of maintaining an empire also demanded adaptability. Changes in law enforcement strategy, economic conditions, and social dynamics required constant vigilance and flexibility. Vario demonstrated a remarkable ability to adjust his operations in response to evolving threats, whether by relocating key activities, restructuring crews, or modifying financial arrangements. His adaptability ensured the resilience of his empire, even as external pressures intensified. Associates learned that agility and foresight were essential for survival, and Varios' example reinforced the importance of anticipating change rather than reacting impulsively. During this era, Vario also emphasized the cultivation of loyalty and trust. He understood that relationships were the foundation of sustainable power. Associates were not only employees but part of a network bound by mutual benefit and respect. Vario rewarded dedication and competence, creating an environment in which loyalty was both expected and voluntarily offered. At the same time, he maintained subtle mechanisms for accountability, ensuring that the consequences of betrayal or negligence were clear without unnecessary public displays of force. This approach reinforced organizational cohesion and minimized internal instability. Education and mentorship became increasingly important in this high-pressure environment. Vario trained younger associates not only in operational skills but in the principles of strategy, leadership, and human psychology. They learned that power was not demonstrated through recklessness or immediate gratification but through careful planning, observation, and disciplined execution. By investing in the development of capable lieutenants, Vario ensured that his empire could continue functioning effectively even when he was absent or facing external challenges. Another aspect of Vario's strategy was integration with legitimate social and business networks. Maintaining connections with business leaders, union officials, and local influencers provided both cover and leverage. These relationships allowed him to anticipate legal developments, influence economic activity, and maintain social influence without drawing direct attention. Varios' understanding of the interplay between legitimate and illicit spheres of power allowed him to operate strategically, reinforcing his authority while minimizing risk. The cumulative effect of these pressures, law enforcement scrutiny, internal rivalries, and the complexity of a growing empire demonstrated the value of calm, strategic leadership under duress. Varios' ability to remain composed, think several steps ahead, and maintain control of both people and operations under pressure defined his success during this period. Associates observed that leadership was less about aggression and more about foresight, adaptability, and understanding the human factors that drive behavior. Ultimately, Varios' management of pressure highlighted the principle that resilience and foresight are the foundations of sustainable influence. While external forces constantly threatened his empire, his disciplined approach ensured that operations continued effectively and that his authority remained unquestioned. He demonstrated that even in high-risk environments, careful planning, strategic delegation, and an understanding of human behavior could preserve power and minimize disruption. By the mid-1970s, Paul Vario had solidified his reputation as a meticulous strategist and a quiet yet formidable authority within organized crime circles. His influence extended far beyond street-level operations, encompassing a wide network of crews, businesses, and social connections that functioned as a cohesive and highly disciplined system. Varios' ability to oversee high-stakes criminal ventures while minimizing exposure to law enforcement distinguished him from contemporaries, demonstrating that intelligence, foresight, and careful planning could create lasting power even in a dangerous and unpredictable environment. The expansion of Varios' operations during this period reflected both ambition and strategic calculation. Gambling, already a cornerstone of his empire, had grown in scale and complexity. He oversaw multiple illegal poker rooms, sports betting networks, and underground casinos, ensuring that revenue streams were consistent and secure. Each operation was managed with precision. Trusted lieutenants supervised day-to-day activity, payments were monitored, and accountability was enforced without the need for excessive force. Vario's talent for delegation allowed him to maintain control over vast operations, while shielding himself from direct exposure to law enforcement scrutiny. Loan sharking also evolved into a sophisticated enterprise under Vario's supervision. Debtors were carefully tracked, and repayment schedules were meticulously organized. Vario understood that the perception of authority was as critical as actual enforcement. Borrowers complied not only because of fear, but because they recognized the precision, reach, and influence underpinning the operation. This careful balancing of power and perception ensured that the enterprise ran smoothly, generating steady revenue and reinforcing loyalty among associates. Labor rackets and union influence continued to be a significant aspect of Vario's empire. Control over local unions, trucking routes, and warehouses allowed him to exert influence over legitimate economic activity, creating both revenue streams and leverage against competitors. These arrangements were carefully managed to avoid attracting undue attention, demonstrating Vario's understanding of the importance of blending legal and illegal operations. By integrating influence across multiple spheres, he strengthened his position and created a system that was resilient, adaptable, and difficult for outsiders to penetrate. A defining feature of this period was Vario's emphasis on discipline and efficiency within his crews. Associates were trained not only in operational procedures, but also in the principles of strategy, risk management, and interpersonal dynamics. Vario cultivated a culture in which competence, loyalty, and discretion were rewarded, while carelessness or betrayal had tangible consequences. By instilling these values, he created a network that operated reliably and cohesively, even under pressure. His ability to manage people effectively was as important to his success as any individual criminal act, highlighting the central role of leadership in organized operations. Strategic alliances were crucial to maintaining and expanding influence. Vario cultivated relationships with other key figures within the Lucchese family, allied mafia factions, and even certain elements of the business and political world. These alliances were carefully managed to maximize benefit and minimize risk. Vario understood that influence was strengthened not just by direct control, but by the perception of connectedness and authority. His ability to negotiate, mediate, and subtly pressure rivals allowed him to expand operations without provoking unnecessary conflict or law enforcement attention. High-stakes ventures required careful risk assessment and operational foresight. Vario approached each new initiative with the same methodical precision that had guided his rise. He considered potential gains, legal risks, internal vulnerabilities, and the reactions of rivals before committing resources. This calculated approach allowed him to undertake ambitious operations that generated substantial revenue while preserving the stability of his empire. Vario's careful orchestration of complex ventures demonstrated a level of strategic thinking, often absent in the street-level view of organized crime. Psychology played a central role in Vario's management of both associates and rivals. He understood that influence depended not only on actions but also on perception. His reputation for intelligence, decisiveness, and omnipresence created a climate in which compliance was often voluntary, disputes were minimized, and resistance was rare. Vario's ability to read people, anticipate reactions, and adjust tactics accordingly allowed him to maintain control without resorting to excessive force. Associates learned that loyalty, efficiency, and discretion were rewarded, reinforcing the culture of disciplined professionalism that defined his empire. Expansion during this period also required adaptability. Changes in law enforcement strategy, economic conditions, and social dynamics demanded constant vigilance and flexibility. Vario demonstrated a remarkable ability to adjust operations, restructure crews, and modify financial arrangements in response to shifting circumstances. His adaptability ensured that the organization remained resilient, capable of withstanding pressure from law enforcement and rival factions alike. Associates were trained to understand the importance of flexibility and strategic thinking, ensuring that the network could continue operating effectively under evolving conditions. Mentorship was a key element of Vario's leadership. He actively trained younger associates, teaching them not only the mechanics of operations, but the principles of strategy, discipline, and risk management. This investment in human capital ensured that his network had capable lieutenants who could maintain operations, enforce discipline, and execute complex projects with minimal oversight. By cultivating talent and reinforcing loyalty, Vario strengthened the long-term sustainability of his empire, ensuring that it could function efficiently even in his absence. Despite the sophistication of his operations, Vario's approach remained grounded in calculated patience. He avoided impulsive actions and focused on long-term stability rather than short-term gain. Each decision was carefully evaluated, and every move was designed to reinforce control, preserve loyalty, and minimize exposure. This patience and foresight allowed Vario to achieve a level of operational consistency and security that was rare in the high-risk world of organized crime. The mid-1970s also saw Vario consolidating his reputation as a strategist and negotiator. He was recognized not for violence or spectacle, but for his ability to orchestrate complex operations, manage human dynamics, and maintain authority under pressure. His quiet dominance reinforced the perception that he was omnipresent, knowledgeable, and capable of maintaining control over multiple layers of operations simultaneously. This perception was a critical component of his influence, demonstrating the power of reputation and strategic presence in sustaining authority. Vario's story during this period illustrates a key principle. Influence and authority are built not through impulsive action or brute force, but through strategic planning, disciplined execution, and a deep understanding of human behavior. By managing people, operations, and perception with precision, he created an empire that was resilient, efficient, and highly profitable. His life offers valuable lessons in leadership, risk management, and strategic thinking, demonstrating that careful planning and intelligent decision-making often outweigh sheer force or immediate action. By the late 1970s, Paul Vario had reached the pinnacle of his influence within the New York underworld, a position earned not through flamboyant displays or reckless violence, but through decades of strategic calculation, disciplined leadership, and a profound understanding of human behavior. His operations now spanned multiple boroughs, integrating gambling, loan sharking, labor rackets, and other ventures into a seamless network that generated substantial revenue and maintained a reputation for quiet dominance. Vario's influence was evident not only in the loyalty of his associates, but in the respect and caution he commanded from rivals and allied factions alike. At this stage, Vario's management style was defined by precision, delegation, and operational foresight. Every crew, every operation, and every transaction was part of a larger, coordinated system designed to maximize profit while minimizing exposure. His gambling networks, once limited to local poker rooms and underground betting parlors, had expanded into sophisticated operations with multiple layers of oversight. Trusted lieutenants managed individual venues, ensuring that day-to-day activity ran smoothly while reporting results and potential issues to Vario. This delegation allowed him to focus on strategic planning, negotiation, and the orchestration of larger initiatives. Loan sharking remained a critical revenue source, but Vario had refined the system to ensure both profitability and control. Payments were tracked meticulously, and associates responsible for enforcement exercised a blend of subtle intimidation and precise oversight. Vario understood that perceived authority could be more effective than overt force. Borrowers complied because they recognized the reach and meticulous planning underpinning the enterprise. This combination of psychological influence and structural discipline ensured that operations were efficient, predictable, and secure. Vario's influence over labor unions and other legitimate industries had also matured significantly. By strategically leveraging union relationships, he controlled access to trucking routes, warehouses, and business contracts, integrating legitimate operations with his broader network. This approach provided both financial gain and leverage over rivals, while simultaneously offering a layer of protection against law enforcement scrutiny. Vario's ability to operate in both legal and illicit spheres reflected his understanding that lasting influence requires penetrating multiple layers of social, economic, and political networks. A defining feature of Vario's peak was his emphasis on psychological insight and human management. He understood that influence was not solely derived from wealth or fear, but from perception, loyalty, and the careful orchestration of social dynamics. Associates were trained not only in operational skills but in the principles of discipline, negotiation, and discretion. They understood that loyalty was cultivated through respect and reward, and that mistakes or disloyalty could have serious consequences. Vario's calm, calculated presence reinforced the perception that he was omnipresent, aware, and capable of controlling outcomes without overt displays of force. During this period, Vario also dealt with increasing law enforcement pressure. Federal investigations were becoming more sophisticated, employing wiretaps, undercover operations, and intelligence gathering that threatened to compromise even the most discreet networks. Vario's response was methodical. Operations were compartmentalized, sensitive information was restricted to trusted lieutenants, and intermediaries shielded him from direct involvement in illegal activities. His ability to anticipate potential vulnerabilities and implement preventative measures was critical in maintaining the continuity and security of his empire. High-stakes criminal ventures demanded not only operational oversight but strategic negotiation and alliance building. Vario carefully navigated relationships with other mafia families, balancing cooperation with subtle competition. These alliances were maintained through a combination of diplomacy, strategic concession, and a reputation for decisiveness. By cultivating trust while demonstrating capability and resolve, Vario ensured that conflicts were minimized and that his influence remained unchallenged. His approach illustrated that intelligent negotiation and alliance management are as important as operational control in sustaining power. The late 1970s also saw Vario emphasizing resilience and adaptability. The criminal landscape was constantly shifting, with rival factions vying for control, new legal regulations emerging, and law enforcement employing increasingly sophisticated tactics. Vario's network was designed to withstand these pressures through redundancy, delegation, and strategic foresight. Crews were trained to manage operations independently while maintaining alignment with the broader objectives of the empire. Vario's foresight ensured that even under scrutiny or disruption, his operations could continue functioning with minimal impact. Mentorship remained a cornerstone of Vario's leadership philosophy. He actively trained younger associates in the principles of strategy, operational management, and human behavior. These lessons went beyond mechanics, emphasizing foresight, psychological insight, and the disciplined execution of plans. By developing competent lieutenants, Vario ensured that his empire could continue operating efficiently even in his absence, reinforcing both loyalty and operational resilience. This investment in human capital created a culture of accountability and professionalism that strengthened the cohesion of the network. Despite the expansion and sophistication of his operations, Vario maintained a commitment to measured patience and calculated action. Each new venture, alliance, or strategic move was carefully evaluated for risk and potential reward. Impulsive action was avoided, and every decision was designed to reinforce long-term stability and authority. This methodical approach distinguished Vario from less disciplined figures whose reliance on aggression or spectacle often invited disruption or law enforcement attention. His career demonstrated that enduring influence is rooted in thoughtful, deliberate action rather than immediate gratification or flashy displays of power. By the end of the decade, Paul Vario had established an empire characterized by discipline, intelligence, and quiet dominance. His ability to integrate multiple operations, manage human behavior, and anticipate challenges created a system that was both profitable and resilient. Associates operated within clearly defined structures, rivals respected his authority, and law enforcement pressure was mitigated through careful planning and discretion. Vario's leadership style exemplified the principle that real influence combines strategic planning, psychological insight, operational discipline, and adaptive intelligence. The lessons from Vario's peak period resonate beyond the realm of organized crime. His story underscores the importance of strategic vision, operational foresight, and the cultivation of human talent. Effective leadership, whether in business, personal endeavors, or community influence, depends on understanding the systems in which one operates, managing relationships strategically, and anticipating challenges before they arise. Vario's life demonstrates that quiet, calculated authority often achieves more sustainable results than aggressive, impulsive action. As the late 1970s progressed into the early 1980s, Paul Vario faced an environment that tested every aspect of his leadership and strategic skill. Law enforcement scrutiny had intensified significantly, fueled by nationwide initiatives aimed at dismantling organized crime. Federal and local authorities had become more sophisticated in their methods, employing surveillance, undercover operations, and intelligence gathering with unprecedented precision. For Vario, these developments meant that his previously successful strategies of quiet dominance and compartmentalized operations required constant adaptation. Survival and continued influence depended on foresight, discretion, and meticulous planning. The escalating attention from law enforcement forced Vario to reevaluate the structure of his operations. His network, which had grown increasingly complex, needed additional layers of insulation to protect key figures and revenue streams. He implemented measures to minimize direct involvement in illicit transactions, relying on trusted lieutenants to execute day-to-day activities. This strategy not only reduced personal exposure but also created redundancy within the organization, ensuring that even if one segment were compromised, the broader network could continue functioning. Vario's foresight reflected a sophisticated understanding of risk management, the ability to anticipate threats and implement preventive measures before they could escalate into crises. Operational security became a central focus. Vario emphasized strict protocols for communication, meetings, and financial handling. Associates were trained to understand the importance of discretion and compartmentalization, recognizing that a single misstep could expose the entire organization. Surveillance awareness became a routine part of operations, and trusted intermediaries were used to relay instructions and execute high-risk activities. This careful orchestration demonstrated that intelligence and preparation were more effective than force in maintaining control under pressure. Internal challenges also became more prominent as the network grew. Ambition, rivalry, and differing agendas among associates created potential for friction. Vario's leadership relied on psychological insight to identify early signs of dissent or conflict. He maintained order through a combination of respect, subtle influence, and strategic delegation. By rewarding loyalty and competence while addressing potential threats discreetly, he created an environment where discipline was maintained without constant oversight or overt displays of authority. Associates came to understand that their success was tied directly to adherence to his principles, reinforcing the cohesion of the network. Rival factions within the organized crime ecosystem also presented challenges. Competing families and independent operators sought to expand influence, sometimes encroaching on territories or revenue streams controlled by Vario. His approach was consistently strategic. He relied on negotiation, alliances, and controlled pressure rather than impulsive confrontation. By assessing each situation carefully, he could neutralize threats, secure cooperation, or strategically intimidate without attracting unnecessary law enforcement attention. Vario's ability to manage these complex relationships highlighted his role not as a mere enforcer, but as a strategic leader whose influence extended beyond immediate operations. The integration of legitimate business and social networks became increasingly important. Vario's relationships with union officials, business leaders, and civic contacts provided both leverage and protection. These connections allowed him to anticipate potential legal challenges, exert influence in business negotiations, and create a broader social shield around his operations. By embedding influence across multiple spheres, he reduced vulnerability and strengthened the perception of omnipresent authority. This dual approach, balancing legitimate and illicit activity, was a hallmark of Vario's strategic thinking and contributed significantly to the resilience of his empire. One of the most critical aspects of Vario's strategy during this period was adaptability. Law enforcement methods, economic conditions, and social dynamics were changing rapidly, and the ability to adjust operations in response to these shifts was essential. Vario demonstrated remarkable flexibility, restructuring crews, relocating operations, and modifying financial arrangements to maintain efficiency and minimize risk. Associates were trained to anticipate change and respond appropriately, creating a culture in which adaptability was a key component of operational success. Mentorship remained central to Vario's leadership philosophy. He continued to cultivate younger associates, imparting lessons not only on operational mechanics, but on strategy, discipline, and human behavior. These lessons emphasized the value of foresight, observation, and careful execution. By developing a cadre of competent and disciplined lieutenants, Vario ensured the long-term sustainability of his network. Leadership was not concentrated solely in one individual. Instead, it was distributed strategically across the organization, reinforcing both resilience and efficiency. Despite increasing pressure from external forces, Vario's operations continued to thrive due to his ability to balance ambition with caution. Every new venture, alliance, or initiative was carefully evaluated for risk, potential reward, and long-term implications. Impulsive or aggressive action was avoided, as it could destabilize the network or attract unnecessary attention. This methodical approach enabled him to expand influence while preserving stability, demonstrating the effectiveness of calculated strategic decision-making in high-pressure environments. Vario's peak influence in this period was characterized by strategic control rather than overt visibility. While others in the criminal underworld relied on aggression or public notoriety, Vario's authority was subtle, pervasive, and sustained by reputation and operational discipline. Associates, rivals, and law enforcement alike recognized his intelligence, foresight, and ability to manage complex systems. This reputation, carefully cultivated over years, functioned as both a shield and a tool, reinforcing compliance, discouraging challenge, and ensuring the continued effectiveness of his empire. The story of Paul Vario during this era offers important lessons about leadership, risk management, and strategic resilience. His ability to adapt to increased scrutiny, manage complex human dynamics, and maintain control over a sophisticated network demonstrates that influence is most enduring when it is strategic, disciplined, and psychologically informed. Real power is not about immediate gratification or visible force. It is about understanding systems, anticipating challenges, and cultivating networks that can function effectively under pressure. As the 1980s began, Paul Vario had become a figure of quiet dominance in New York's organized crime scene, a man whose influence extended beyond the visible operations of gambling dens, loan sharking, and labor rackets. His empire had matured into a sophisticated, multi-layered network that required strategic oversight, operational discipline, and meticulous management. By this period, Vario's understanding of both human psychology and systemic organization allowed him to innovate, expand, and maintain control in ways that few of his contemporaries could replicate. Vario's approach to expansion in the early 1980s focused on leveraging the structures he had built during previous decades while integrating new methods of control and revenue generation. Gambling remained the backbone of his operations, but Vario's strategy now emphasized diversification and systemic oversight. High-stakes poker rooms, sports betting circuits, and underground casinos operated as interconnected units, with layers of trusted lieutenants overseeing individual venues. Each operation fed into a larger financial and intelligence network, providing both steady revenue and critical insight into the behaviors and loyalties of associates. This organizational complexity required careful monitoring, but it also offered resilience. The failure or compromise of one operation could be absorbed without destabilizing the broader system. Loan sharking had also evolved into a more sophisticated enterprise. Vario recognized that enforcing debt repayment through intimidation alone was insufficient for long-term profitability. Instead, he implemented structured, predictable systems that emphasized accountability, transparency within the organization, and the perception of omnipresent authority. Borrowers complied because they understood that the network was disciplined, attentive, and capable of enforcing its rules efficiently. Vario's approach highlighted a crucial lesson in leadership. Authority is strengthened not just by fear, but by the demonstration of competence, consistency, and organizational discipline. Labor rackets and legitimate business operations continued to play a strategic role in Vario's empire. By consolidating influence over union activity, trucking routes, and local businesses, he ensured not only a steady revenue stream, but also leverage over economic and social networks in the boroughs he controlled. These arrangements were carefully managed to avoid unnecessary exposure, blending legal and illegal activities into a system that provided protection, financial gain, and influence. Vario's ability to operate simultaneously in both spheres exemplified a deeper understanding of strategic influence. Control is most effective when it is both pervasive and discreet. Psychology remained central to Vario's leadership. He was a master at reading people, identifying ambition, weakness, and potential threats before they became problematic. Associates were rewarded for loyalty, competence, and discretion, while those who displayed recklessness or disloyalty faced carefully calibrated consequences. This created an environment in which discipline was maintained through respect, recognition, and subtle authority rather than constant oversight or overt force. Vario's reputation as a calm, calculating, and intelligent leader reinforced compliance, minimized internal conflict, and ensured the smooth functioning of complex operations. Law enforcement pressure continued to shape the strategies Vario employed. Federal agencies and local authorities were more organized, informed, and determined than ever, prompting him to further compartmentalize operations and limit direct exposure. Intermediaries were employed to shield leadership from operational details. Sensitive communications were controlled, and surveillance awareness became a routine aspect of organizational culture. Vario's ability to anticipate investigative tactics and adapt accordingly was critical to maintaining operational security and minimizing risk. His foresight demonstrated that in high-stakes environments, intelligence and planning often surpass brute force as tools for preserving influence. Innovation was a hallmark of Vario's approach during this period. He introduced more systematic management practices, borrowing concepts from legitimate business and adapting them for a clandestine environment. Financial tracking, risk assessment, and personnel management were formalized, allowing him to oversee multiple operations with accuracy and efficiency. This level of administrative sophistication distinguished him from peers, who relied primarily on intimidation or ad hoc management. By treating his criminal network as a structured organization, Vario ensured both scalability and stability, laying the foundation for sustained influence. Vario's expansion strategy also emphasized alliances and networked influence, maintaining cooperative relationships with other mafia families, allied operators, and select business figures allowed him to extend reach without resorting to confrontation. Negotiation, strategic compromise, and subtle pressure were employed to ensure compliance, resolve disputes, and protect shared interests. Vario understood that sustainable authority requires both respect and leverage. Rivals and allies alike needed to perceive him as capable, intelligent, and decisive. These carefully managed relationships reduced friction, minimized risk, and reinforced his broader influence. A significant aspect of this era was Vario's focus on succession and talent development. He actively mentored younger associates, instilling not only operational knowledge but also strategic thinking, ethical awareness within the context of their environment, and leadership skills. This created a cadre of competent lieutenants who could execute complex tasks independently while maintaining alignment with broader objectives. By investing in human capital, Vario ensured continuity, resilience, and the ability to sustain operations even in the face of legal challenges or unexpected disruptions. Even as his empire expanded, Vario maintained a philosophy of calculated patience and measured action. Each initiative, whether a new gambling venture, financial arrangement, or alliance, was evaluated for both immediate benefit and long-term stability. Impulsive decisions were avoided, as they could destabilize operations, invite legal scrutiny, or provoke unnecessary rival conflicts. Vario's methodical approach reinforced the principle that sustained influence is built not on short-term gain but on consistent, intelligent, and strategic decision-making over time. The early 1980s also brought heightened awareness of public perception and reputation. Vario understood that authority is reinforced by perception. Associates, rivals, and law enforcement needed to see him as intelligent, capable, and omnipresent. This reputation acted as both a deterrent and a tool, discouraging rebellion, fostering loyalty, and shaping the broader environment in which his empire operated. By maintaining this carefully cultivated perception, Vario enhanced compliance, minimized disruption, and ensured the continued success of his operations. The lessons from Vario's management during this period extend beyond criminal activity. His approach underscores the importance of strategic planning, operational discipline, and human insight. Leadership is effective when it combines foresight, adaptability, and the careful orchestration of both people and systems. Resilience is built through structure, mentoring, and an understanding of the broader environment. Patience, intelligence, and disciplined execution often outweigh force or impulsive action, providing a model for sustainable success in any challenging or high-stakes context. By the mid-1980s, Paul Vario faced an increasingly complex landscape that demanded both strategic acumen and operational finesse. While his empire had grown in scale and sophistication, it also faced heightened scrutiny from federal and local law enforcement, as well as subtle but persistent challenges from internal rivalries. Vario's continued dominance depended on his ability to balance authority, maintain loyalty, and adapt to evolving threats, all while safeguarding the network he had meticulously built over decades. One of the most pressing challenges came from internal dynamics. As his operations expanded, the number of associates and lieutenants increased, creating opportunities for ambition, disagreement, and competition. Vario understood that unchecked rivalry could destabilize the organization and threaten operational continuity. To manage this, he relied on psychological insight and disciplined mentorship, identifying emerging leaders, nurturing loyalty, and strategically placing individuals in positions where their ambitions aligned with organizational goals. Associates were trained to understand that their advancement was tied to competence, reliability, and alignment with Vario's strategic vision, ensuring that personal ambition was channeled constructively rather than destructively. Vario also faced external pressure from law enforcement, which had intensified considerably by the mid-1980s. Investigative techniques had grown more sophisticated, including electronic surveillance, undercover operatives, and financial audits targeting illicit revenue streams. Vario's response was methodical. He compartmentalized operations, insulated key decision-makers, and implemented layers of accountability that limited exposure. Sensitive communications were restricted, intermediaries were used for high-risk operations, and operational security was elevated to a core principle within the organization. Associates were trained in awareness and discretion, understanding that survival depended as much on prudence as on competence. Despite these pressures, Vario continued to expand and innovate within his operations. Gambling networks, loan sharking, and labor influence were maintained at peak efficiency while integrating systems that allowed for greater oversight and adaptability. Operations were coordinated through trusted lieutenants who could manage day-to-day activity independently while reporting critical information to Vario. This allowed him to maintain strategic oversight without micromanaging, reinforcing both efficiency and resilience. Vario's approach highlights a key principle of leadership. Sustainable influence is achieved through effective delegation, clear structures, and robust monitoring systems. A hallmark of Vario's mid-1980s strategy was his ability to adapt in real time to changing circumstances. Economic shifts, law enforcement initiatives, and social dynamics required continuous vigilance. Vario demonstrated flexibility. By restructuring crews, relocating operations, and adjusting financial arrangements as necessary. He emphasized a culture of anticipatory thinking within the organization, training associates to recognize potential threats, respond strategically, and maintain operational continuity under pressure. This proactive approach minimized disruption and maintained the stability of the empire, even in the face of evolving challenges. Leadership through psychological insight remained central to Vario's control. He understood that fear alone was insufficient to sustain loyalty or disciplined perception. Respect and reputation were equally powerful. Associates complied not just because of the consequences of disobedience, but because they recognized the intelligence, foresight, and capability underpinning Vario's authority. Internal cohesion was reinforced through clear expectations, structured mentorship, and rewards for competence and loyalty, creating an environment in which discipline was voluntary rather than imposed. Strategic alliances also played a critical role in maintaining authority. Vario skillfully navigated relationships with other mafia families, allied operators, and select business figures. Negotiation, subtle pressure, and controlled compromise ensured cooperation and minimized conflict. By fostering these alliances, Vario extended his influence while protecting his operations from external threats. He understood that sustainable authority is not enforced solely through power or intimidation, but is reinforced by mutual benefit, strategic positioning, and the perception of competence. The mid-1980s also demanded vigilance in financial oversight. Revenue streams from gambling, loan sharking, and labor rackets were carefully monitored to prevent leakage, detect anomalies, and ensure compliance within the network. Vario introduced systematic tracking, reporting, and accountability protocols, allowing him to maintain operational efficiency while reducing vulnerability. Associates were trained to understand that financial discipline was a cornerstone of long-term stability, reinforcing both loyalty and operational effectiveness. Operational security extended beyond immediate activities to include long-term risk management. Vario anticipated potential legal, social, and operational threats, implementing measures to mitigate exposure. This included careful management of relationships, controlled communication channels, and strategic decision-making that prioritized long-term sustainability over short-term gain. By embedding these principles into the organization, Vario created a network capable of withstanding external pressure while maintaining functionality and cohesion. Mentorship remained a cornerstone of Vario's strategy. Younger associates were groomed not only for operational tasks but for leadership, strategic thinking, and risk management. By cultivating capable lieutenants, he ensured that the network could function efficiently, even in his absence or under legal pressure. This focus on talent development reinforced operational resilience, promoted loyalty, and created a culture of disciplined professionalism that extended throughout the organization. A defining characteristic of Vario's mid-1980s leadership was the emphasis on calculated patience. Every new initiative, strategic decision, and alliance was carefully evaluated for both immediate impact and long-term consequences. Impulsive action was avoided, as it could destabilize operations, attract unwanted attention, or provoke internal discord. By prioritizing thoughtful planning and measured execution, Vario demonstrated that lasting influence is built on foresight, discipline, and strategic intelligence rather than short-term displays of force. Even under rising pressure, Vario maintained quiet authority, exercising control through reputation, strategic oversight, and operational discipline rather than spectacle. His presence was felt throughout the organization, yet he rarely needed to intervene directly. Associates, rivals, and law enforcement alike recognized his intelligence, foresight, and ability to maintain order. This combination of subtlety, efficiency, and perceptive leadership reinforced both compliance and loyalty, allowing operations to continue smoothly in an increasingly challenging environment. The lessons from Vario's management during this period extend far beyond organized crime. They illustrate the value of strategic foresight, adaptability, operational discipline, and psychological insight in maintaining influence under pressure. Leadership effectiveness is reinforced by the ability to anticipate threats, manage complex networks, and cultivate loyalty and competence. Vario's example demonstrates that enduring authority is achieved not through aggression or impulsive action, but through careful planning, structured organization, and intelligent management of both people and systems. As the 1980s advanced, Paul Vario confronted a period defined by increasing scrutiny and intensifying challenges that tested both his strategic intellect and his operational acumen. The environment in which he had built his empire carefully structured, disciplined, and resilient was now under unprecedented pressure. Law enforcement had become more coordinated and sophisticated, employing advanced investigative techniques, including electronic surveillance, financial audits, and informants who penetrated deeper than ever before. At the same time, internal dynamics within his organization required careful management to prevent disruption and maintain cohesion. Vario's continued influence depended on his ability to adapt, anticipate, and manage both human and systemic complexities with precision. A key element of Vario's strategy during this period was mitigating legal exposure. He was acutely aware that any direct connection to illicit activity could unravel decades of carefully constructed influence. To address this, relied on delegation and operational insulation, ensuring that day-to-day criminal activities were managed by trusted lieutenants while he remained at a strategic level, monitoring outcomes, analyzing risk, and coordinating long-term plans. This approach allowed him to maintain control over multiple layers of operations without drawing attention from law enforcement, exemplifying the principle that leadership in high-risk environments requires both discretion and foresight. Internal challenges, while less visible than external pressure, were equally significant. The expansion of his empire meant more associates, more complex roles, and more potential for conflict. Ambition, jealousy, and differing personal agendas had the potential to destabilize operations. Vario relied on psychological insight to anticipate and neutralize these challenges, placing individuals in roles that leveraged their strengths while mitigating potential risks. Associates were consistently reminded that loyalty, competence, and adherence to organizational principles were essential for advancement. By aligning personal ambition with strategic objectives, Vario maintained cohesion and minimized disruption. The operations themselves became increasingly sophisticated and interconnected. Gambling networks, loan sharking systems, and labor rackets were not only profitable but also integrated into a broader intelligence and communication framework. Each segment of the organization provided both financial results and critical operational insight, allowing Vario to make informed strategic decisions. This multi-layered structure created resilience. Even if one segment faced disruption from law enforcement or internal issues, the broader network could continue functioning effectively. Vario's ability to coordinate these operations while remaining insulated from direct exposure underscores the importance of strategic orchestration and structural foresight in managing complex enterprises. Law enforcement pressure escalated during this period, with federal agencies coordinating investigations across state lines and employing undercover operatives to gather evidence. Vario anticipated these developments and reinforced operational security protocols. Sensitive communications were tightly controlled, meetings were held in secure and varied locations, and information was shared strictly on a need-to-know basis. Associates were trained in surveillance awareness and operational discretion, emphasizing that survival depended as much on intelligence and vigilance as on operational competence. Vario's proactive adaptation demonstrated a critical leadership principle. Anticipating threats before they materialize is far more effective than reacting under pressure. Another defining aspect of this period was Vario's strategic diplomacy with allies and rivals. While previously he had relied primarily on reputation and operational competence to manage relationships, the late-stage challenges demanded more nuanced engagement. He strengthened alliances, mediated disputes, and subtly leveraged influence to ensure cooperation without confrontation. By reinforcing networks of interdependence, Vario mitigated potential threats from both internal factions and external competitors. This approach highlights a vital lesson in leadership. Sustainable authority often depends on managing relationships strategically, not merely asserting dominance. Vario also demonstrated remarkable adaptability in organizational structure. Crews were reorganized to optimize efficiency, responsibilities were reassigned to mitigate vulnerabilities, and operational procedures were updated to reflect both internal performance and external threats. Associates were expected to internalize the principle that flexibility was critical. Rigid adherence to outdated methods could expose the network to risk. Vario's insistence on adaptability ensured that the organization remained resilient, capable of maintaining operations even under evolving pressure. Mentorship remained a central component of Vario's leadership. Younger associates were groomed not only for operational competence but also for strategic thinking, decision-making under pressure, and psychological awareness. By cultivating capable lieutenants, Vario ensured that his empire could continue to function efficiently even in his absence or under legal scrutiny. Leadership succession and talent development were critical to preserving continuity, reinforcing the principle that a resilient organization relies on both capable individuals and disciplined systems rather than a single leader. The mid to late 1980s also emphasized calculated patience and measured decision-making. Each new initiative, operational adjustment, or alliance was evaluated for both immediate impact and long-term consequences. Impulsive action was strictly avoided, as it could compromise stability, attract legal attention, or provoke internal disputes. Vario's approach reinforced the principle that enduring influence is sustained not through short-term aggression, but through consistent, intelligent, and strategic execution over time. Financial management continued to be a cornerstone of Vario's strategy. Revenue from gambling, loan sharking, and labor influence was carefully monitored to prevent discrepancies and ensure organizational accountability. Structured reporting, oversight, and auditing systems allowed Vario to detect issues early and implement corrective action without disrupting operations. This emphasis on discipline in financial management not only preserved profitability but also reinforced the perception of competence and professionalism throughout the network. Vario's reputation as a calm, intelligent, and omnipresent leader remained his most powerful tool. Associates, rivals, and law enforcement alike recognized his strategic foresight, operational discipline, and psychological acuity. This perception reduced friction, discouraged rebellion, and reinforced compliance, illustrating that influence is as much about reputation and presence as it is about direct action. Vario's ability to exercise authority without overt displays of power exemplifies the effectiveness of subtle, strategic leadership. Ultimately, Paul Vario's approach during this late stage demonstrates the value of strategic foresight, disciplined execution, adaptability, and psychological insight. Maintaining influence in the face of external scrutiny and internal challenges requires careful planning, structural resilience, and the ability to anticipate and neutralize threats before they manifest. His story illustrates that enduring authority is built not through aggression or impulsive action, but through intelligence, preparation, and the cultivation of capable, loyal teams. By the late 1980s, Paul Vario's influence had reached a stage where preserving the longevity of his empire became as critical as expanding it. The pressures of law enforcement, shifting social dynamics, and the natural evolution of his organization required him to focus on strategic transition, organizational resilience, and legacy building. Vario understood that no operation, no matter how sophisticated, could endure indefinitely without careful management of leadership succession, operational continuity, and human dynamics. His approach during this period exemplified the qualities of foresight, adaptability, and disciplined execution that had characterized his career from the beginning. One of the most pressing concerns was legal exposure. Federal and local authorities were more aggressive than ever, deploying advanced surveillance technology, financial tracking, and the cultivation of insider informants. Vario's response was methodical. He further insulated himself from direct operational involvement, creating layers of separation between decision-making and execution. Key associates and lieutenants were given operational authority while maintaining strict protocols to protect sensitive information. By compartmentalizing activities and responsibilities, Vario minimized the risk of direct association, ensuring that the leadership structure remained secure even under intense scrutiny. Operational continuity was equally important. Vario recognized that an organization as complex and interdependent as his empire could be destabilized by the removal of key figures or by sudden disruptions. He emphasized redundancy, delegation, and structured oversight, ensuring that multiple lieutenants were capable of managing operations independently while adhering to the overarching strategic vision. This not only protected the network from external disruption, but also reinforced internal discipline, demonstrating to associates that the organization was both resilient and well-managed. Mentorship and succession planning became central to Vario's focus. He invested significant time in grooming the next generation of leaders, imparting lessons on strategy, human behavior, operational management, and risk assessment. Associates were trained to think critically, anticipate challenges, and execute plans with precision. By embedding strategic thinking and leadership skills across multiple tiers of the organization, Vario ensured that authority could be maintained even in his absence. This forward-looking approach highlights a key principle. Effective leadership is measured by the ability to cultivate capable successors, not just by personal control or influence. At the same time, Vario continued to manage internal dynamics with precision. Long-standing relationships required careful attention to prevent complacency or conflict, and ambitious lieutenants needed guidance to align personal objectives with organizational goals. Vario employed subtle psychological strategies, reinforcing loyalty through recognition, trust, and the distribution of responsibility, while addressing potential threats with discreet but firm measures. This balance of respect, accountability, and strategic oversight maintained cohesion within a growing and increasingly complex organization. Financial management remained a cornerstone of Vario's empire. Revenue from gambling, loan operations, and labor influence was monitored with rigor, emphasizing accuracy, transparency within the network, and accountability among lieutenants. Detailed tracking systems were in place, allowing Vario to detect discrepancies early and make informed strategic decisions. By maintaining strict financial discipline, he reinforced the perception of competence and professionalism, both within his organization and among allied networks. Vario also understood the importance of perception and reputation in sustaining influence. Even in his later years, his presence was felt through the discipline of his operations, the loyalty of associates, and the careful management of alliances. Rivals recognized his strategic acumen, law enforcement understood his operational subtlety, and associates respected his authority. Vario's quiet, methodical approach demonstrated that enduring influence depends as much on strategic perception and credibility as it does on direct action or immediate control. A key aspect of Vario's final years of influence was adaptability in the face of evolving challenges. Law enforcement strategies, economic conditions, and social dynamics continued to shift, requiring ongoing adjustments in organizational structure, operational methods, and interpersonal management. Vario demonstrated the ability to pivot strategically, relocate operations when necessary, and implement procedural updates that preserved operational integrity. This adaptability reinforced the resilience of his network, ensuring that it could withstand both external scrutiny and internal challenges without collapse. Mentorship extended beyond operational skills to encompass strategic and ethical thinking within the context of high-stakes management. Vario trained lieutenants not only to execute tasks but to anticipate consequences, weigh risks, and understand the psychological dimensions of human behavior. Associates learned that intelligence, discipline, and foresight were more valuable than aggression or immediate gain. By embedding these principles, Vario cultivated a culture in which competence, foresight, and strategic awareness were integral to success, creating a network capable of sustaining itself over time. Despite the complexities of managing a vast and high-risk network, Vario maintained a commitment to measured decision-making and calculated patience. Each initiative, operational adjustment, and alliance was carefully evaluated for both short-term impact and long-term sustainability. Impulsive action was avoided, and decisions were guided by a combination of intelligence, experience, and foresight. This approach ensured that the empire remained stable, resilient, and strategically positioned for continuity. Vario's later years also demonstrated the importance of strategic diplomacy and networked influence. Maintaining alliances with other crime families, allied operators, and select business contacts required subtle negotiation, mediation, and reinforcement of mutual benefit. By nurturing these relationships, Vario not only expanded operational reach but also mitigated potential threats and reinforced stability. The ability to sustain influence without resorting to overt aggression or coercion exemplifies the power of intelligent negotiation, credibility, and strategic positioning in leadership. Ultimately, Paul Vario's legacy lies not just in the scale of his empire but in the discipline, foresight, and strategic insight with which it was managed. His story illustrates that influence and authority are maintained through careful planning, structured organization, effective delegation, and the cultivation of capable, loyal associates. His success was a product of intelligence, patience, adaptability, and psychological acuity, rather than brute force, impulsive action, or public notoriety. By the late 1980s and early 1990s, Paul Vario's empire had reached a stage where maintaining operational control required both experience-honed strategy and meticulous oversight. After decades of building one of the most disciplined and sophisticated criminal networks in New York, he now faced pressures that tested the limits of his foresight, adaptability, and leadership. Legal authorities had intensified their campaigns, employing a combination of surveillance, financial scrutiny, and strategic informants to dismantle organized crime networks. Vario's response was a combination of prudence, structural adaptation, and mentorship, reflecting his understanding that sustainable authority depends as much on intelligence and planning as on operational scale. Vario's operational philosophy during this period was grounded in compartmentalization and delegation. He understood that direct involvement in illicit activities was a liability under increasing law enforcement scrutiny. To mitigate this, he relied on trusted lieutenants to manage the day-to-day operations of gambling, loan sharking, and labor influence, while he oversaw the broader strategic direction from a distance. This separation not only protected him from direct legal exposure, but allowed him to focus on strategic risk assessment, operational resilience, and organizational continuity. Vario's approach highlights a critical lesson. In high-risk environments, the ability to manage indirectly through disciplined structures is as important as direct control. Internal cohesion remained a top priority. As operations became more complex and associates more ambitious, the potential for conflict grew. Vario used a combination of psychological insight, structured mentorship, and clearly defined roles to maintain order. Associates understood that loyalty and competence were prerequisites for advancement, and that adherence to operational protocols protected both individual and collective interests. Vario's leadership emphasized respect over fear, intelligence over force, and strategic alignment over impulsive action. By cultivating a culture of accountability and discipline, he ensured that the organization could withstand both internal and external pressures. Financial and operational oversight were also central to sustaining influence. Vario maintained detailed knowledge of revenue streams, ensuring that each segment of the operation was performing as intended. By implementing structured reporting systems and robust auditing protocols, he could identify discrepancies, manage risks, and allocate resources effectively. This attention to detail reinforced both efficiency and credibility, demonstrating that disciplined financial management is critical to organizational stability. It also provided an additional layer of insulation against legal scrutiny, as operations could be monitored and controlled without direct personal involvement. The legal landscape had become increasingly formidable. Federal authorities, aware of the sophistication of Vario's network, employed complex investigative strategies designed to penetrate the operational hierarchy. These included wiretaps, undercover operatives, and financial forensics. Vario's response was strategic. He emphasized operational security, compartmentalized communication, and the use of intermediaries to shield key decision-makers. Associates were trained to recognize potential threats, maintain discretion, and report irregularities promptly. Vario's proactive approach to risk management illustrates a key principle of leadership. Anticipation and preparedness are more effective than reactive measures. Strategic alliances with other crime families and allied operators continued to be a vital aspect of Vario's approach. While past decades had established his reputation as a reliable and competent leader, ongoing collaboration with peers required diplomacy and negotiation. Vario cultivated relationships that balanced mutual benefit with strategic leverage, ensuring cooperation while minimizing conflict. By emphasizing intelligence and foresight in these interactions, he reinforced his position as a central figure in the broader organized crime ecosystem, demonstrating that influence is reinforced as much by perception and reputation as by operational power. Mentorship during this phase took on a forward-looking dimension, focusing on succession planning and the long-term sustainability of operations. Vario invested in training a cadre of capable lieutenants, emphasizing strategic thinking, operational competence, and psychological acuity. Associates were expected not only to execute tasks but to anticipate challenges, evaluate risk, and maintain cohesion within the network. By embedding these skills throughout the organization, Vario ensured that leadership would continue seamlessly, preserving the influence and operational integrity of his empire, even as pressures mounted. Adaptability remained a defining feature of his approach. The criminal landscape was evolving rapidly, with economic, social, and legal dynamics constantly shifting. Vario demonstrated the ability to restructure operations, adjust revenue models, and reassign responsibilities to maintain operational continuity. Associates were trained to respond flexibly to challenges, reinforcing resilience and reducing the risk of disruption. This proactive emphasis on adaptability ensured that the organization could sustain influence and profitability despite external threats and internal complexities. Vario's personal leadership style continued to emphasize calculated patience, observation, and strategic restraint. He rarely intervened impulsively, preferring to allow systems and protocols to operate independently while monitoring results. This approach reinforced his reputation as a composed, intelligent, and omnipresent leader, whose authority did not require overt displays of force. Associates and rivals alike recognized that. Vario's influence was derived not from spectacle but from a consistent demonstration of competence, foresight, and disciplined management. As law enforcement pressure reached its peak, Vario focused on reinforcing organizational resilience. Redundancies were implemented, operational protocols were tightened, and risk assessment became a continuous process. By embedding a culture of vigilance, accountability, and strategic foresight, Vario ensured that the network could weather challenges without collapse. This period illustrates a critical lesson in leadership. Long-term influence is sustained not by power alone, but by the ability to anticipate threats, structure resilient systems, and cultivate capable individuals. Vario's later years of operational activity also highlight the importance of ethical intelligence in leadership, even in high-stakes and morally complex environments. While the activities of his empire were illegal, the principles he applied, strategic thinking, disciplined execution, human insight, and risk management, offer valuable lessons for lawful enterprises. Leadership effectiveness is not measured solely by immediate success, but by the ability to sustain influence, maintain cohesion, and navigate challenges with intelligence and foresight. Ultimately, Paul Vario's final years of operational control reflect a legacy of strategic mastery, disciplined leadership, and organizational foresight. His influence endured because he combined operational expertise with psychological insight, structural resilience, and meticulous planning. Associates were empowered, alliances were managed intelligently, and risks were anticipated and mitigated systematically. Vario's approach demonstrates that enduring authority is achieved through foresight, adaptability, and disciplined execution, rather than aggression, impulsiveness, or visibility. As the late 1980s transitioned into the early 1990s, Paul Vario's empire began to face unprecedented challenges that tested every aspect of his strategic leadership and operational acumen. Years of careful planning, disciplined management, and psychological insight had allowed him to maintain influence through periods of external scrutiny and internal complexity. However, the cumulative weight of intensified law enforcement operations, internal vulnerabilities, and broader societal changes began to expose cracks in even the most resilient systems. Vario's response during this period offers a detailed illustration of strategic thinking in times of decline, emphasizing foresight, resilience, and adaptive leadership under pressure. The first and most significant pressure came from law enforcement escalation. Federal agencies, coordinated across jurisdictions, employed advanced surveillance technology, undercover investigations, and financial forensics aimed at dismantling organized crime networks. These operations were no longer limited to monitoring activities. They focused on gathering actionable evidence that could lead to indictments and convictions at multiple levels of the organization. Vario recognized that traditional methods of operational security were insufficient against these comprehensive and technologically sophisticated investigations. He responded with increased compartmentalization, relying on trusted lieutenants to execute operations while isolating leadership from direct exposure. Meetings were conducted in smaller, more secure formats, and communication was strictly limited to essential information, with intermediaries relaying instructions in a controlled manner. Internal challenges became more pronounced during this period. As the organization grew, so did ambition, rivalry, and the potential for internal conflict. Vario's success had created opportunities for ambitious lieutenants to seek greater influence, sometimes leading to friction and misalignment with organizational objectives. His approach remained consistent. Psychological insight, careful delegation, and structured mentorship were used to maintain cohesion. By aligning the personal ambitions of associates with the strategic needs of the organization, Vario mitigated potential threats while encouraging performance and loyalty. Associates were expected to understand that discipline, discretion, and competence were prerequisites for continued advancement. Financial oversight during this phase became critical. Revenue streams from gambling, loan operations, and labor influence remained significant. But the growing legal and operational pressures demanded heightened accountability and auditing. Vario implemented structured reporting systems and redundancy protocols to ensure accuracy and prevent leaks. He monitored financial performance indirectly, relying on trusted lieutenants while maintaining the authority to intervene when discrepancies arose. This approach allowed him to continue operations while minimizing the risk of exposure and reinforcing the perception of competence and control within the organization. A central challenge of this period was maintaining operational resilience amid systemic pressure. Law enforcement tactics had evolved to target vulnerabilities across multiple levels, from low-level associates to high-ranking leaders. Vario responded by introducing redundancy in leadership roles, cross-training lieutenants, and creating multiple pathways for operational execution. These measures ensured that the organization could continue functioning even if individual nodes were compromised, illustrating a fundamental principle of resilient leadership. Systems matter as much as individuals in sustaining influence under stress. Despite growing pressure, Vario continued to exercise strategic diplomacy with allies and competitors. The landscape of organized crime was shifting, and maintaining alliances required careful negotiation, subtle influence, and strategic compromise. Vario emphasized the mutual benefits of cooperation and minimized confrontations whenever possible, understanding that conflict during a period of increased law enforcement scrutiny could be disastrous. His ability to navigate these relationships highlights the importance of networked influence and credibility in sustaining authority. Even during periods of decline, mentorship and succession planning were more important than ever. Vario's focus shifted toward preparing the next generation of leaders to operate effectively under extreme pressure. Associates were trained not only in operational tasks, but also in strategic thinking, risk assessment, and adaptability. By embedding these skills across multiple levels of the organization, Vario sought to ensure continuity and resilience, demonstrating that leadership is not merely about controlling current operations, but about cultivating systems and individuals capable of sustaining influence in the future. Adaptability remained a defining characteristic of Vario's leadership. He adjusted operational structures, reallocated resources, and reorganized teams in response to evolving threats. Associates were expected to embrace flexibility, understanding that rigidity in operations could result in vulnerability. Vario's proactive approach to adaptation reinforced organizational resilience, allowing the empire to maintain influence despite mounting external pressures and internal challenges. The late-stage period also emphasized strategic patience and measured decision-making. Each operational adjustment, alliance, negotiation, or initiative was carefully evaluated for both immediate and long-term consequences. Impulsive action could exacerbate vulnerabilities, attract legal attention, or destabilize internal dynamics. Vario's consistent reliance on foresight, intelligence, and deliberate action illustrates a key principle. Enduring influence is achieved through disciplined execution and strategic assessment, not through reactionary or impulsive measures. Vario's approach during this period demonstrates the importance of perception and reputation. Even as operations faced heightened scrutiny, the perception of his intelligence, foresight, and competence continued to reinforce loyalty and compliance within the network. Associates understood that Vario's authority derived not from force alone, but from his ability to orchestrate complex operations, anticipate threats, and maintain resilience in the face of adversity. This perception, carefully maintained over decades, functioned as both a deterrent and a stabilizing factor within the organization. The consequences of decline, while inevitable, were mitigated by Vario's strategic foresight and disciplined leadership. By focusing on operational insulation, mentorship, financial oversight, and adaptive structures, he preserved influence and maintained organizational integrity longer than might have been expected under increasing legal and social pressure. His example underscores a fundamental lesson in leadership: sustainable influence depends on foresight, disciplined execution, and the cultivation of resilient systems and capable individuals. Ultimately, Paul Vario's late-stage experience illustrates that even highly sophisticated networks are subject to pressure from external forces and internal vulnerabilities. However, his methods of anticipation, strategic delegation, mentorship, and operational discipline ensured that the organization could sustain itself and retain influence despite challenges. Vario's story provides a detailed blueprint for understanding resilience in high-pressure, high-stakes environments, emphasizing that intelligence, foresight, and careful orchestration are more enduring than brute force or immediate power. As the 1990s progressed, Paul Vario's once formidable empire began to feel the cumulative impact of decades of operational pressure, legal scrutiny, and evolving social dynamics. The complex network he had carefully built over 30 years faced challenges that could not be fully mitigated, despite his intelligence, foresight, and disciplined leadership. Federal authorities had intensified their efforts, employing comprehensive investigations, sophisticated surveillance, and insider cooperation to dismantle organized crime operations systematically. Vario's response during this final stage reflected a combination of strategic caution, operational foresight, and focus on preserving legacy rather than short-term control. One of the most pressing realities was the legal dismantling of key operations. Federal and local law enforcement agencies, equipped with wiretaps, informants, and financial tracing, began to systematically target the operational core of Vario's network. Gambling establishments, loan operations, and labor rackets faced raids, asset seizures, and indictments of key associates. Vario's role shifted decisively from active operational oversight to strategic supervision and risk mitigation, relying on trusted lieutenants to manage operations while he focused on long-term preservation of influence and reputation. His ability to navigate this transition highlights an essential leadership principle. Effective leaders prioritize strategic continuity over short-term control when facing unavoidable pressure. Internal dynamics also demanded careful attention. Ambition, frustration, and fear within the organization increased as legal pressures mounted. Associates faced uncertainty about their roles, financial stability, and personal security. Vario addressed these challenges with psychological insight, clear communication, and structured oversight, reinforcing loyalty and discipline. He ensured that associates understood the importance of adherence to operational protocols and that their actions had direct consequences for both organizational integrity and personal outcomes. By maintaining this balance, he preserved operational cohesion even as the network began to contract under external pressure. Financial management remained critical. During this period, revenue streams were disrupted by legal intervention, and the risk of asset exposure was higher than ever. Vario implemented precise oversight and adaptive financial strategies, ensuring that resources were protected, operational priorities were adjusted, and sensitive financial flows were monitored with extreme care. These measures allowed for continuity in essential operations, while mitigating exposure, demonstrating that disciplined financial management is a cornerstone of organizational resilience under duress. A defining feature of this final stage was Vario's focus on organizational insulation and succession planning. He understood that sustaining influence beyond his active operational role required capable lieutenants who could navigate both internal and external pressures. Mentorship intensified, with associates trained not only in operational execution but in strategic thinking, risk evaluation, and ethical decision-making within the framework of high-pressure environments. By cultivating these skills, Vario ensured that the network could continue functioning with integrity even as his personal role became increasingly constrained by external forces. Adaptability became paramount. Vario adjusted operations, relocated sensitive activities, and reassigned responsibilities to maintain operational integrity and reduce legal exposure. Associates were trained to embrace flexibility, understanding that rigidity could lead to disruption or legal vulnerability. Vario's ability to implement these adjustments efficiently reflects the broader leadership principle that resilience is built on the ability to adapt systems and individuals to evolving threats. Despite mounting pressure, Vario maintained a reputation for strategic calm and perceptive oversight. Associates, rivals, and law enforcement alike recognized his intelligence, foresight, and operational discipline. His leadership style, characterized by quiet authority and calculated patience, reinforced compliance and loyalty while minimizing internal friction. Vario's reputation served as a stabilizing force, demonstrating that credibility and perception are as powerful as direct action and sustaining influence. During this final dismantling phase, strategic alliances with other networks were carefully maintained. Vario understood that external cooperation could provide protection, reduce risk, and preserve operational viability in specific areas. Diplomatic negotiation, subtle leverage, and careful mediation ensured that these alliances remained functional, even as the broader network faced increasing pressure. His approach highlights the principle that sustained influence often depends on intelligent collaboration and the careful management of interdependent relationships. As the organization contracted, Vario emphasized ethical intelligence in leadership and strategic foresight. He instilled in his lieutenants the importance of careful decision-making, risk assessment, and long-term planning. Even in a morally complex and high-stakes environment, the principles of disciplined execution, foresight, and human insight remain central to sustaining influence. These lessons, though forged in a criminal context, illustrate universal leadership concepts, the importance of structure, strategic thinking, and the cultivation of capable individuals to maintain operational resilience. Vario's experience during this phase also demonstrates the value of reputation and strategic patience. While legal actions dismantled many operational aspects of his empire, his ability to preserve authority and influence in perception allowed him to maintain a degree of control over remaining operations and to guide strategic decisions indirectly. This illustrates that leadership effectiveness is not solely measured by direct power, but by the ability to sustain influence through foresight, credibility, and disciplined management. Ultimately, the final dismantling of Vario's operational influence provides insight into how highly complex organizations respond to systemic pressure. Even the most sophisticated structures are vulnerable to external scrutiny and internal stress, but resilience can be maximized through foresight, adaptive structures, mentorship, and disciplined execution. Vario's experience underscores that leadership is tested most profoundly during periods of adversity, and the qualities that sustain influence strategic thinking, psychological insight, operational discipline, and adaptability remain critical even in decline. As Paul Vario entered the later years of his life, the focus of his influence had shifted from active operational management to the consolidation of legacy, strategic reflection, and the imparting of wisdom to capable lieutenants. The decades-long empire he had meticulously built faced the realities of a world where law enforcement, social awareness, and evolving norms had fundamentally altered the landscape. Yet, even amid contraction and dismantling of certain operations, Vario's approach demonstrated the enduring power of strategic foresight, disciplined leadership, and adaptability. This phase of his life offers an invaluable lesson in leadership. Influence is measured not only by what is achieved in active control, but by what endures when direct authority is diminished. One of the primary focuses during this stage was ensuring continuity and resilience within the remaining operations. Vario recognized that while some aspects of his empire could not survive external pressures, others could continue effectively if guided by strong leadership principles. He emphasized the development of lieutenants who could operate with independence, foresight, and adherence to structured protocols. Associates were trained to anticipate challenges, respond strategically, and maintain operational integrity, even in the absence of direct oversight. By investing in these human systems, Vario ensured that the core of his organizational principles could persist, demonstrating that enduring influence relies as much on the cultivation of capable individuals as on operational scale. A critical component of this consolidation was mentorship and strategic education. Vario devoted significant time to imparting lessons learned over decades: the value of patience, the importance of structured planning, the necessity of disciplined financial management, and the skill of reading human behavior. Associates were encouraged to adopt a long-term perspective, weighing immediate gains against potential risks and the sustainability of operations. By embedding these lessons into the fabric of the organization, Vario created a culture of foresight, resilience, and adaptability that extended beyond his personal involvement. Financial oversight, even in the winding down phase, remained a strategic priority. Revenue flows from remaining operations were carefully monitored to prevent disruption, mismanagement, or unnecessary exposure. Vario introduced structured reporting, accountability protocols, and auditing measures to ensure that remaining assets were managed effectively. This attention to financial discipline was not simply about maintaining revenue. It reinforced operational integrity, trust within the network, and the perception of competent leadership. It also demonstrated a critical principle of leadership. Even when influence is waning, operational discipline sustains credibility and control. Vario's approach during this period also reflected a profound understanding of risk management and legal exposure. With law enforcement continuing to target organized crime networks aggressively, he maintained layers of insulation between himself and operational activities. Meetings were structured with discretion, communication channels were carefully controlled, and decision-making authority was delegated with clear boundaries. By reducing personal exposure while guiding strategic outcomes, Vario exemplified a critical aspect of resilient leadership: the ability to influence outcomes without unnecessary personal risk. Mentorship extended beyond operational skills to encompass ethical judgment and strategic decision-making within high-pressure, complex environments. Associates were trained to consider the consequences of their actions, evaluate risks intelligently, and align personal goals with organizational objectives. This emphasis on ethical intelligence, decision-making under uncertainty, and long-term thinking ensured that the next generation of leaders could sustain the organization's principles, even as external conditions evolved. Vario's approach highlights the universal leadership lesson that preparing successors and embedding principles is more enduring than direct control. In these later years, Vario also focused on reflecting on strategic lessons and consolidating personal and organizational knowledge. He analyzed past successes and failures, considering how operational structures, human dynamics, and strategic foresight had contributed to both growth and resilience. This reflective process allowed him to extract insights that could guide remaining associates and future leaders, reinforcing the importance of learning from experience, integrating knowledge into systems, and applying foresight to decision-making. By institutionalizing these reflections, Vario ensured that the organization could benefit from his experience, even beyond his active involvement. A notable feature of this period was the emphasis on credibility and perception. While some operational influence had diminished, Vario's reputation as a strategic thinker, disciplined leader, and psychologically insightful figure remained intact. Associates and peers recognized that his authority was grounded in intelligence, foresight, and experience rather than visibility or coercion. This perception allowed him to continue shaping outcomes indirectly, demonstrating that enduring influence relies as much on reputation and credibility as on operational control. Adaptability continued to be central. As remaining operations faced legal, economic, and social pressures, Vario emphasized flexibility in execution, decision-making, and leadership roles. Associates were expected to adjust quickly to changing circumstances, prioritize strategic objectives over immediate gratification, and maintain discipline even under stress. This adaptive mindset reinforced the resilience of remaining operations and highlighted a universal leadership principle: the ability to adjust systems and strategies in response to evolving conditions is essential for long-term success. Vario also reflected on the broader implications of leadership and influence. He recognized that authority, while significant, is temporary and contingent upon a combination of factors, including foresight, operational discipline, credibility, and the cultivation of capable individuals. By focusing on these principles, he ensured that his legacy would endure even as specific operations were dismantled or restructured. This understanding demonstrates that true leadership is measured by the sustainability of influence and the systems it creates, not solely by immediate control or power. Ultimately, Paul Vario's later years highlight the enduring power of strategic foresight, disciplined execution, mentorship, and organizational resilience. Even as external forces reduced operational control, his influence persisted through the systems, structures, and individuals he had cultivated. Associates learned to operate with independence, foresight, and discipline, ensuring that core principles continued to guide decision-making. Vario's story underscores the universal lessons of leadership. Sustained influence is built on intelligence, preparation, adaptability, and the cultivation of human and organizational capital. In the final stage of his life, Paul Vario's story became less about operational control and more about reflection, lessons learned, and the enduring legacy of decades. spent navigating a complex, high-stakes environment. Having built, managed, and ultimately adapted a sophisticated network of operations, Vario was uniquely positioned to observe the principles that governed influence, human behavior, and organizational resilience. These reflections not only define his personal legacy, but also offer timeless lessons for anyone seeking to understand leadership, strategy, and the careful balance between risk and reward. Vario's life emphasized that true leadership extends far beyond direct control. Influence is sustained through careful planning, strategic foresight, and the cultivation of capable individuals who can carry forward the principles and structures upon which an organization depends. By the final phase of his life, Vario had transitioned from active management to advisory and mentorship roles, guiding lieutenants to operate with independence while maintaining the core discipline and vision that had defined the network. This transition illustrates a universal leadership truth. The measure of influence is not only in what is achieved personally, but in what endures when direct authority diminishes. One of the most striking lessons from Vario's life is the importance of psychological insight in leadership. He understood human motivations, anticipated reactions, and structured relationships to balance ambition, loyalty, and competence. By aligning individual incentives with organizational goals, Vario reduced friction, mitigated internal conflict, and reinforced cohesion. This approach demonstrates that leadership is as much about understanding people as it is about managing operations or executing strategy. Influence grows strongest when human dynamics are accounted for thoughtfully, and when relationships are leveraged with intelligence rather than coercion. Operational foresight was another hallmark of Vario's career. Decades of managing complex enterprises taught him that anticipation and strategic planning outweigh reactive measures. From structuring financial systems to insulating leadership from direct exposure, Vario consistently prioritized long-term sustainability over short-term gains. Even when external pressures increased, he relied on systems, processes, and trained individuals to maintain resilience. This principle is applicable beyond any specific context. Organizations thrive when structures, contingencies, and human talent are aligned with strategic objectives. Mentorship emerged as a defining feature of Vario's enduring influence. He devoted time and energy to developing the next generation of leaders, instilling in them the importance of foresight, disciplined execution, and ethical judgment within high-pressure environments. Associates learned to think critically, anticipate challenges, and execute operations intelligently while adhering to core principles. Vario's investment in mentorship ensured that the organization could sustain itself, demonstrating that the cultivation of capable successors is a central responsibility of any effective leader. Financial discipline, operational redundancy, and structured communication remained central to Vario's philosophy. Even as operational control diminished, he emphasized the importance of monitoring resources, mitigating risk, and maintaining clear, disciplined reporting structures. These measures ensured both continuity and credibility, reinforcing the principle that resilience in complex systems relies on oversight, accountability, and proactive management. Perhaps most importantly, Vario's story highlights the significance of reputation and credibility. Throughout his life, his influence was reinforced not by overt displays of force, but by the perception of intelligence, foresight, and operational acumen. Associates, competitors, and external observers recognized his authority because it was grounded in competence, consistency, and strategic thought. This aspect of leadership sustaining influence through credibility and presence remains a lesson with universal application. Perception, earned through demonstrated skill and disciplined decision-making, can be as powerful as direct control. Vario's reflections also underscore the principle of adaptability in the face of systemic change. Over decades, social, legal, and operational dynamics evolved continuously, requiring adjustments to strategy, structure, and human management. Flexibility was essential to sustain influence and operational integrity. Associates were trained to respond to these changes thoughtfully, balancing discipline with innovation and maintaining operational coherence even in challenging circumstances. This demonstrates that resilience is embedded in the ability to anticipate, adapt, and recalibrate systems and human behavior in response to evolving conditions. The final years of Vario's life also offered profound insight into the consequences of risk, the inevitability of change, and the importance of foresight. No matter how sophisticated an organization, external forces such as legal intervention, societal shifts, and internal dynamics can challenge stability. The most effective leaders prepare for such scenarios, building systems that are resilient, adaptable, and capable of sustaining core principles even when direct control is no longer possible. Vario's legacy illustrates that strategic planning and disciplined execution create enduring influence, even in the face of inevitable change. Vario's experience also illuminates the role of ethical intelligence in decision-making under pressure. While his operations were illegal, the principles he applied: anticipation, disciplined execution, psychological insight, and structured oversight reflect broader truths about leadership in any context. Leaders who understand risk, human dynamics, and organizational design can achieve sustainable success without relying on coercion or short-term opportunism. Vario's career underscores that intelligence, foresight, and ethical judgment are as critical to resilience and influence as operational capability. Ultimately, the full arc of Paul Vario's life presents a comprehensive study in strategic leadership, organizational resilience, and the cultivation of enduring influence. From building his empire to navigating its contraction, he consistently applied principles of foresight, adaptability, and disciplined execution. Associates were empowered, operations were structured with redundancy and accountability, and relationships were managed with psychological insight. These elements combined to create a network capable of sustaining influence, even as external pressures intensified and operational realities evolved. Key takeaways and motivation. Paul Vario's life offers timeless lessons for leadership, strategy, and resilience. Enduring influence is achieved through strategic foresight, anticipating challenges and planning for long-term sustainability; operational discipline, structured systems, financial oversight, and accountability; psychological insight, understanding human behavior to foster loyalty, reduce conflict, and align goals; mentorship, cultivating capable individuals to sustain principles and operational integrity; adaptability, recalibrating strategy and operations in response to evolving conditions; credibility and reputation, reinforcing authority through competence and consistency rather than force. Vario's story demonstrates that success and resilience are not solely measured by immediate power or wealth, but by the ability to build systems, influence capable individuals, and navigate complexity intelligently. His experiences provide a blueprint for leadership applicable in any field, emphasizing preparation, foresight, and the cultivation of sustainable influence. As the final chapter closes, the life of Paul Vario serves as a reminder that strategic intelligence, discipline, and human insight are the foundations of enduring authority, and that even under immense pressure, the lessons of foresight, mentorship, and adaptability can leave a legacy that outlasts direct control. The story concludes not with a focus on notoriety or wealth, but on the principles that define sustainable leadership and resilience, principles that can guide anyone seeking to navigate complex systems and achieve lasting impact.